why wouldn't they just have kept updating the game the entire time rather than split? I still think it was a mistake to even go for Overwatch 2, and I think they're kind of trying to rectify that mistake a little bit. Now they're turning around and being like, oh, no, we actually want to go full live service. We're going to update the game consistently. Here's our roadmap. We're going all modern. But they can't turn back time, so they're just doing the best they can right now.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Visionaries episode 19. We're almost to 20. That's nuts because we've been doing this now for like 9 weeks. But welcome to Visionaries episode 19. Today we are joined by Seagull, the content creator, former Overwatch pro. You've done a lot of things, I feel like, over your career. Just like various different parts, too.
I'm 30, so, you start late enough, or rather early enough, and you still end up doing many things in this industry.
That's right. I feel old compared to our industry now, and I'm 25, and you're 5 years older than I am, and so it's like I am meeting writers now who are like 17, 18, 19 years old, and I'm just like, oh my god, like that feels like forever ago, and it really isn't. So nonetheless, I would assume that most people here have known or know who Seagull is. But if not, really give you a little bit backstory of Seagull's career. Seagull was one of the earliest pros in the Overwatch community in 2016. He was eventual part of the Dallas Fuel Overwatch League team for a period of time as well, but then retired from competitive play to become a full-time content creator, of which he has been since, and greatly respect him for his work. I think that very vital to the scene that you're in particular, and just FPS games more generally, where your career is spanned. But I wanted to have him on this week to talk about Overwatch 2, which came out officially yesterday. Has been being played in the Overwatch League all season since earlier this year. Had a closed beta and open beta phase earlier this year as well, and as we got to see in a video that you put out recently, you also got the opportunity to play it during BlizzCon Online last year. So I think you have a lot of unique perspectives. Before we sort of dive into the meat and potatoes, though, of the conversation, I wanted to say kind of 2 housekeeping notes. Really important here. So one, we had invited someone from the Overwatch dev team to be a part of this conversation, and they declined. I want to make it clear that the offer was extended, especially if this conversation, if any of it comes off as negative. I wanted them here to have a bigger discussion about the game and some of the critiques of the game, and they decided not to do so. And the second part, I want to be really careful about over-indexing this conversation towards the esports side of the game, because I think that there's a tendency to do that in certain communities where you talk very exclusively about high-level player needs, etc. And this game and any game in the esports community is not exclusively for its top players; it's for a broader community that it serves. And while I think there are some critiques for everyone in the case of Overwatch 2 over the past few days, I think there are some that are very narrow-minded towards that sort of more player focus. So I'm going to do my best to get us away from kind of just the high-level sort of dilemma from top players and have a broader conversation about the state of the game. Can you describe where you think, prior to yesterday, where the Overwatch community was in terms of engagement, the sort of how people felt about the game, and especially in this lull period between, it being in beta and people able to play it, and now they haven't been able to play it, but they've been able to watch it, right? Like this sort of lull period that existed over the past 5 months or so.
So do you mean the lull period in the terms of the game going back to when they started development on Overwatch 2 and stopped content for the first game? Or do you mean in just the past year as people saw Overwatch 2, but didn't have the opportunity to play it?
Why don't we do both? Because I do want to talk about what it's been like. I guess we can start more broadly when they stopped dev on Overwatch 1 altogether, but then I also want to talk about that gap that exists between when people got to play Overwatch 2 for a short period of time, then the service is cut off, right? And it went back into development, and then up to now where people were finally, some people were allowed to get into the game yesterday for the first time. Obviously, it's had immense server issues over the past 24 hours.
I would say, so going back historically over the past couple of years, it's been a pretty steep and steady decline in interest and engagement in the franchise as a whole. I would say the community sentiment around the game has been kind of boredom and also confusion, particularly in the last year. Most people, it was mostly the way they looked at Overwatch wasn't that they actively disliked it, or rather that, there will always be the hardcore audience, for example. In it, pretty much any game, we'll find things to complain about and have our own issues and nuances with any type of gameplay and this and that. But when I look at the overall franchise, I think that when a developer stops working on it for years and then they have all these competitors come out one after another that are all free to play live service audiences, the interest in the game just starts to dwindle very, very quickly. And as for the last year, however, I think most people were just sort of, I would say, confused because the vision for Overwatch changed over time, and I don't feel that was communicated particularly well to players, especially as there's a lot of internal turmoil in development, like the game director Jeff Kaplan leaving. I want to say among like the streamers and the people we as content creators talk to, I think pretty much the entire community team rotated out as well in the last couple of years. And I will say, actually, the new community team is also amazing. I think they have a much larger budget now, which is thank goodness, because the old community team they were tough. They were trying to work the best they could. Yeah, I would say mostly decline and also what's going on, just sort of confusion among the community.
One thing, you do have a line personally, as I understand, like to be able to talk to Blizzard from time to time more frequently than like the average player, obviously, right? You've been the face of this game from a community perspective for a long time. You obviously were into the game early. And so I want to ask about what the communication's been like to you. Has Blizzard been communicating throughout this process at all with you, or are you in the dark as much as everyone else?
That's a hard one to talk about because there's NDAs. But for the most part, I would say that creators, we will know things. Let's put it this way, because I talked about how there's sort of a shift internally as they started ramping up for Overwatch 2. They generally will be a little more open with creators, but nothing like insane. It would be things along the lines of, let's say that maybe there's a blog post going up soon, so we'll give you like a few days notice or heads up, so that way maybe you can prep content on it type of thing. But usually nothing super, super crazy. Not that I can think of anyway.
And so part of the video that you recently put out, and for those who haven't seen it, would very much recommend watching Seagull's video on Overwatch 2. It was about 10 minutes of commentary. It's nice bite-sized. You did a good job kind of getting it all down to sort of that bite-sized bit. But one of the things you brought up in your video, you showed some of the footage from BlizzCon Online last year, right? And some of the PvE mode, and you compared it to the likes of like Left 4 Dead and some of the others in genre, right? These like horde type shooting games that are incredibly popular. I mean, we've seen the success of several of those over the past couple of years. When did you start to see potentially, or when did you start to notice that maybe that's not what we were going to be getting this year as promised? Even if it's not you hearing that directly, but you kind of assessing that and realizing maybe the game that we're going to get this year is not what we're expecting.
Probably the moment the news broke that Jeff Kaplan was leaving the company. Because I want to say there was just tweets from one of the producers on Overwatch, and I think it was kind of just the general sentiment I always received. It was something along the lines of like Jeff Kaplan's vision for the game always included PV as a big, heavy portion. And I also know just from his public persona that he was always kind of the gamer on the developer team in that way of just... He was the person who would come out and interview standing against a lot of monetization practices. He was the person who came out talking about how we would never have DLC, we'll never monetize characters, stuff like that back in 2016. But the moment Jeff Kaplan left the team, that's when I started to think, wow, like something must be really going on internally. And that was around the same time as the sexual harassment lawsuit started and stuff like that at Blizzard. But also at the same time, that was around, I want to say that was immediately following BlizzCon Online, 2021, and then there was a short period of time, maybe a few months, where suddenly he left, and then that stuff started up. And I think I would have to go back and find the dates again. I do want to say that there was suddenly a very abrupt announcement on PvP updates where suddenly the game announced that, hey, we're moving to 5v5. And we're like, wait a minute, as players, you guys just had BlizzCon Online. Why didn't you guys just announce that there? And so it kind of felt very sudden.
If you had to speculate, why was there a change from 6v6 to 5v5? Like, what do you think the impetus was to make that change?
I think they've kind of said that actually publicly many times at this point, which is essentially that they're trying to change the game to become a little bit more solo carry potential. The idea that, and I think there's also a lot of social elements in Overwatch that kind of play into this. And this is true of any competitive FPS game. It's the idea that if you throw in a bunch of people in a solo queue environment where you just log on, you're like, I'm going to go play rank queue today. As developers, you want to be aware of, how do we try to reduce the amount of social friction as much as possible between players. And so Overwatch in the history of its game has kind of done some systems or added some systems to try and address that. So for example, they added role queue. The idea that like, oh, hopefully, you guys all sign up for the role immediately when you get into the game. You don't rage at each other as much. And that was a big fundamental change. And I feel like the 5v5 system, this was a little bit obviously more gameplay centric than the social side of things, like almost entirely. But I think it is a partial, it's sort of, they're trying to bring the game just a little bit past its 6v6 roots and how the game was developing over time into becoming almost like WoW Arena centric. And I use that term WoW Arena, but a lot of people say MOBA, but essentially trading abilities and ultimates and lots of shields, large health pools, and try to bring it back just a little bit towards FPS because the game had turned more and more into non-FPS gameplay over time. And so that's one of the more easy, I guess, changes they can make is, what's the most fundamental thing in a shooter that happens? It's like, well, you shoot somebody and they fall over. Okay. Well, the tanks don't do that. They kind of take space around the map and they kind of bully you if you ever try to use map control or traditional FPS mechanics a lot of the time. So immediately when you log in and there's one less on each team, well, there's also the other part of it, which is the game is immediately less chaotic as well, and probably a little more understanding for new players just by the, hey, there's not as much craziness going on the screen right now. So there's so many parts to it. I can't know for sure, but it feels like it's a little bit everything.
You're one of the most successful content creators in the game. You've been around it for its entire lifespan in some capacity, be it pro or content creator. Where would you say the community was prior to yesterday? Like in terms of engagement, being able to look at like your YouTube analytics when you make Overwatch content, etc. Like, was there sort of interest in the game, and or how would you describe that before yesterday?
I also don't think I'm necessarily that qualified to answer that question because I actually left Overwatch, essentially content creation, for like at minimum a year, because I was burning out on the game. The game had become so stale that even me, someone who was literally making money off of the game, there becomes the point in time where it's like, yeah, maybe I would get slightly more numbers doing Overwatch stuff, but why wouldn't I just save my own personal sanity of playing the same game over and over again without new content or updates? It's like you're trying to like get the most value you can from the small. Anyway, at the end of the day, the game wasn't doing too hot, right, in terms of the franchise or anything else. But I wouldn't say interest in the franchise was bad because, as we know, launch has been doing particularly well for Overwatch 2. It's just rather the state of the game and that the current culture of, they weren't adding anything. So why would I log on and play? It's the same thing I just did last year. I don't have any reason to.
Do you think it was a mistake for them to stop pushing live content to Overwatch 1? And do you think it would have been smarter for them to have dual tracks where they're pushing at least something to Overwatch 1 while simultaneously iterating on top of that for Overwatch 2? Obviously, that's a big undertaking from like a project management and time perspective, but do you think that would at least have helped a little bit in this transition?
I think ultimately that if in Blizzard's mind, it probably looked at more of it as one or the other. Like they would never do that. In their mind, why wouldn't they just have kept updating the game the entire time rather than split? Right. I still think it was a mistake to even go for Overwatch 2, and I think they're kind of trying to rectify that mistake a little bit. Now they're turning around and be like, oh, no, we actually want to go full live service. We're going to update the game consistently. Here's our roadmap. We're going all modern. But they can't turn back time, so they're just doing the best they can right now.
Why do you say it's a mistake?
That's a complicated question. I think it's just that with the amount of content that's currently in the game, it's easier to just say that this stuff could have all happened a couple years ago. We didn't have to necessarily wait 3 years for this. If this amount of content, everything was happening was 2 years ago instead of waiting years for no content, then the player base would be much happier as a result. And also Blizzard probably would have made a lot more money, to be honest.
One thing that strikes me is that the messaging that Blizzard takes to kind of behind the veil, right? So we kind of get to see what they say to the public, what they say to the media, etc. But obviously, I'm a reporter. I talk to a lot of people that are inside of Blizzard that are their partners in the case of the esports teams, etc. And the messaging was almost like Overwatch 2 is going to save this game. It's a huge savior, which is sort of the title of this space. Do you think that the PvP updates that just came out, and obviously the biggest pitch has been around the PvE side of things, which we're not even really sure when that's going to come for real. But now, do you think that the PvP part of the game is enough to sort of revive that franchise and drum up that level of excitement that they've been sort of internally telling people about for the past 3 years?
I mean, just on the first part of that, they were really telling the Overwatch League teams that. I just find that so interesting because as a content creator who was actually in the game during that time when Overwatch 2 was announced, I have DMs going back legitimately. I'm like at that BlizzCon talking to people being like, guys, I think they're actually abandoning our game to go work on a PvE game again. Like, I think they're actually just going to go all on a PvE. And to hear that maybe privately behind the scenes they're doing a 180 and telling the Overwatch League teams like, oh, don't worry, guys, it's going to save the game and everything. It's very funny to see the contrast, I guess. As for saving the franchise or anything else, I don't know if it'll save the franchise on day one. And I don't think anything is necessarily needs to like quote unquote save the franchise because the franchise itself is much bigger than Overwatch as a game. It's Overwatch the IP and Overwatch the universe. And so even if Overwatch the game fails, I'm sure that Blizzard will find 20,000 ideas they can spin out of Overwatch the IP that aren't just Overwatch the FPS game. But when it comes to Overwatch the FPS game, I don't think that we necessarily care as much about launch as we care about the trajectory over the next 1 to 2 years, because I kind of look at Apex as an example for stuff like this. So Apex Legends is a game that launched very, very popular, massive success overnight because they had an incredible marketing strategy using creators and streamers. And then their first couple seasons immediately weren't nearly as good. And that was because they had to ramp up their dev time. They weren't ready for that massive success and they had to actually get everything ready behind the scenes. But Apex has remained one of the most popular FPS franchises out there. It's super successful. And they've done that over a long course of time. And so when it comes to Overwatch, asking, will Overwatch 2 revive the franchise? On release, the amount of content right now, that isn't going to like make or break the game. What's going to make or break the game is, can they consistently release content that's going to be polished, engaging, and keep the gameplay fun to its core audience? And will these new monetization systems they've added to the game, which to a lot of corporations on their side of things isn't just monetization, but they consider it player retention. Things like the new player experience, things like the battle pass, they don't just look at that as a source of monetization, but also they give people reasons to log in and play the game every day. Will those be successful in the long term or not? That's up to Blizzard. We're going to have to find that out over the next year or two, I think.
Yeah, to clarify, I think their original vision, at least the one that was, communicated to the Overwatch League type teams the past few years, has been that the PvE part of the game will drum up some interest. The game itself will get a bigger player base, and then by virtue, the PvP side of things, the more hardcore side of things, the esports side of things, will get some trickle down from that, right? Like if more people are logging into Overwatch, even if it's for a single player or a co-op experience, then somehow some of those will come over to the other side of the fence, which sounds like you don't think is realistic.
No, I'm like dumbfounded. No, that's not a reason. That doesn't exist in my mind. As like a player, as someone who plays video games every day, I sit there and I'm like, that's not how any of this works. I mean, I'm sure it may be a very small amount of PvE players would love to go into PvP, but even the public interviews, they're saying simultaneously at the same time where things like, oh yeah, Overwatch is not appealing to a lot of people who don't like playing competitive FPS shooters. Let's go build this PvE game. But then you're saying privately at the same time, they're telling Overwatch League teams, don't worry, guys, they're totally going to transfer into PvP players later. That's just funny. As a player, obviously, I personally extremely disagree with it because they're two entirely different games. I don't think they do share a small audience, but I would say that for the most part, looking at other types of games. So for example, I play a lot of World of Warcraft. I played a lot of Destiny historically. I played a lot of games that have large PvE sections and large PvP sections. Traditionally in those types of games, people will dabble in one or the other a little bit, but they very much main one side of the game. Like if somebody in WoW loves playing WoW arenas or PvP, they just kind of play a lot of PvP and they do very little of the other, and vice versa. And I don't see much crossover in that aspect.
Yeah, I think you're right. I find it interesting that if that's the case, right? I saw this week probably more coverage of Overwatch 1 shutting down its servers than I did of critical praise or just critic anything review of Overwatch 2. I think like the bigger headline was Overwatch 1 is dead, which is striking and a distinct lack of advertising as well. I remember in 2016 how big the Overwatch launch was. I mean, it was a huge deal. Clearly put millions of dollars behind the advertising engine in a way that like very few games have, and it was successful. They got a lot of like sort of short-term hype in 2016, even spilling into 2017 with that game, for like, consistent basically 2 years of love around the game. It, why do you think that is? Like, do you think that if you had to speculate that they just realized like, okay, this is not super differentiated from Overwatch 1 to a casual player, and so therefore we're not going to spend as much and we'll just wait till the PvE stuff comes out and then we'll spend? Like, is that what you think their thinking is around this game?
So wait, rephrase the question because I think I got lost. Are
I
you
I
referring
was
to?
asking like, why do you think they haven't invested the same amount of like advertising budget and marketing around Overwatch 2 as they did Overwatch 1? Do you think that is because the PvE element of the game is not out and ready, or do you think that there's another motivation to that?
I think it's actually what you just said, PvE, but they consider it in many ways. They also label behind the scenes and descriptions of articles and stuff like this is the early access launch. This is not the launch of Overwatch 2, but we're just getting started. And part of their marketing, they also refer to it as a new era. So they really lean into the live service part of things. And I think we've actually talked to them about that behind the scenes as well at some point. And I want to say that I don't remember the answer off the top of my head. It's very specifically, other than it's a little bit different for sure marketing strategies when it comes to live service games versus box products. And so the easiest comparison between those two marketing strategies would be Apex Legends versus every other game. And Apex Legends kind of set the tone for, hey, you can actually do a massive just day one push and it'll still work out. And even Overwatch 2's launch, I mean, it's hard because I don't have objective numbers and I haven't really looked into it too much, but just from, my side of things as a creator, it actually has like a massive amount of interest. I mean, I personally wasn't necessarily covering a lot of Overwatch. Like I said, I haven't actually been playing or been involved in the Overwatch scene for the past year and a half because, I keep up to it. I might log on for a month or two maybe, but then it's sort of like checking in on something that you're interested in, but there's not much going on. You check in, you're like, hey, you still there? You're like, yeah, you're good. Okay, we'll come back next month. Yeah, you are. And I released a video for the first time in like a year and a half about Overwatch, and it hit like 9 on trending on YouTube. People love the review essentially of Overwatch and critique and stuff like that. I'm just like, wow, I guess people really are going crazy over this game, but it was almost hidden. Like you said, there wasn't much marketing. Didn't seem to be that much, but I guess I think that's very telling of sort of the first game success, that people still remember it, even though it felt like they weren't doing that much this time around. It just sort of suddenly all these people appeared and were interested.
Well, it feels like they tapped into this like core audience of people who played 6 years ago, right? And like, oh, maybe I'll just like you, maybe I'll come back and give this thing another shot, right? Like, I'll see how it's doing. But I don't know if that necessarily sustains a community because those people have already moved on from Overwatch, right? Like, in a way, maybe they're going to give this a new shot. Maybe the live service will like keep them engaged, right? If it's constant updates, etc., and it's a little bit more lively. But it feels like they hit some of that initial pull, to your point, not necessarily struck engagement with X number of million brand new players who've never touched an Overwatch game before.
I also think it's important to keep in mind here that a lot of the data surrounding games like this, we just straight up don't know. And so we're basing it off of secondary statistics and metrics that aren't necessarily true. So for example, as a creator, I might judge things off of like YouTube views or Twitch audience or this or that. But that has almost nothing to do whether or not a game is popular necessarily, right? Like there are many, many games that are absolutely massive that might not have particularly interesting live streamers because it doesn't lend itself well to watching live and be entertaining. So I'm not sure. Like it's possible that Overwatch has always had like a decent large size audience, like maybe not as huge as other games because they weren't updating in years, but it's still possible they had like a good amount of players still logging in every month to play Overwatch.
Do you think that, I mean, I, out of curiosity today, was just like scrolling through Twitch and looking at like who was playing Overwatch, and it was a lot of non-Overwatch traditional FPS streamers. Like Asmongold was playing at one point when he got in, Gosu, some of the others, like not the people that were a part of this community for like a long time. Early on, maybe they tried Overwatch, but they're not sort of the regular folks. But to your point, like people from the Overwatch community, yourself included, have gone on to be quite successful in other sort of means of content creation and different subjects and different topics. XQC is the most watched individual streamer on all of Twitch last month, comes from Overwatch, right? Do you think that there is an ability for the game to be revived in that way? Like, do you think it's going to attract new content creators given the gameplay style change and everything, going down to 5v5, making it a more streamable entity?
I would say actually it wouldn't have to do necessarily with the more streamable or the gameplay, but rather just the easy fact of there's so many new players. Of course, there's going to be new content creators. Of course, there's going to be a new audience because now they're going free to play, and so now you have just this massive audience that actually wants to log on and play, but they wouldn't normally have the resources to do so. And so, yeah, sure, the gameplay is different, but I don't think it's necessarily different enough to significant. Like, if you were someone who did not enjoy Overwatch 1 as a core game, maybe you're a tac shooter type of person, maybe you really enjoyed Valorant, Overwatch 2 isn't significantly different enough in that aspect for you to enjoy it. And I kind of compare this a little bit to, as an example, if you're someone like myself, I am not a huge tac shooter fan, right? So tactical shooters like Counter-Strike and Valorant, I don't necessarily like Counter-Strike, but I gave Valorant a shot. I played it for like a month. Turns out I didn't really enjoy it much either, but that's sort of, it wasn't necessarily that I didn't like Valorant. I just wasn't a big fan of the genre, even though Valorant is very different from Counter-Strike. And so it's entirely possible that someone may not enjoy Overwatch 2 or Overwatch in general. I guess what I'm trying to say is it's still the same like core game, just a different remix version to try and fix some of its nuance issues for the core audience that really enjoys it.
Taking a quick break from this episode to have a word from our sponsors. The journey of my career has been pretty fast-paced. I started writing at 17, and within 16 months, I went from having never written a published article to landing a job at ESPN as their youngest talent hire ever. With that fast-paced career, I've often found myself struggling with imposter syndrome and with work-related anxiety. But over the past few years, seeing a therapist really helped me guide my way. And if you think you may be feeling depressed, stressed, anxious, and overwhelmed, then today's sponsor, BetterHelp, is here to help you. BetterHelp offers licensed therapists who are trained to listen and help you. Talk to your therapist in a private online environment whenever's convenient for you. And if you're like me, where it seems there's never enough time in the day, you understand how important that convenience is. There's a broad range of expertise in BetterHelp's 20,000 plus therapist network that gives you access to help that may not be available in your area. Finding a therapist can be hard, but BetterHelp simplifies that experience. You start by filling out a questionnaire to assess your specific needs, and within 48 hours, BetterHelp will match you with a therapist. From there, it's easy. Schedule video and phone sessions, message your therapist as much as you want, whenever you need to, and everything you share is completely confidential. You can request a new therapist at no additional charge anytime. I've been seeing my therapist Diane for 4 years now, and when we reflect back on the progress I've made in my life for the better, it's a pleasant reminder of why I started seeking help and the goals I had when we first started working together. Join the 3 million plus people who've taken charge of their mental health with an experienced BetterHelp therapist. Get your 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/visionaries. That's betterhelp.com/visionaries.
I want to read you a quote from your video because I'm a journalist. I try to break down sort of the nuance of words. Something you said towards the end of your 10-minute video you put out yesterday was, as someone walking into Overwatch 2's launch on October 4th, I see that early access tag. I notice the lack of content, and I can't help but wonder about the other road the old Blizzard might have taken. And I want to parse the end of that sentence for a second. That the road that the old Blizzard might have taken. I want to ask, what do you think the old Blizzard is versus what the new Blizzard is? And why do you think they're different?
I kind of outlined it in my video a little bit. To me, when I was talking about old versus new Blizzard, it wasn't necessarily about anything else other than the idea of we have the money and we have the time and we have developer polish, we have the dev power to wait an absurd amount of time before we come out with games that are extremely polished and extremely ready to go. And so in that type of phrase, what I'm really discussing is the decision to release a game as early access versus a box product and potentially wait another year or two. Old Blizzard and their old Blizzard philosophy would kind of state that, like, oh no, the game's ready when it's ready, you know? And then new Blizzard, and I kind of put new Blizzard in there because Aaron Keller actually talked about this at length in many interviews now. They're changing their ideas. They want to actually modernize a little bit. They want to be able to put stuff out when it's ready and not just wait until everything is ready. And they're trying to become less perfectionistic over time. So that way they can actually kind of get in the game, if that makes sense, along with everyone else, because it feels like it's old. Although he doesn't say that, but I guess I would.
Well, it's interesting too. You mentioned some of the turnover that they've had with like Jeff Kaplan out the door and Aaron taking over as the lead game designer. They've had leadership turnover very significantly over the past year and change as well, right? They were sued last summer by the Department of Fair Employment and Housing in California for alleged sexual abuse within their company and not appropriately handling it. Those words of the DFVH, not mine, to be clear. But we've seen the exit of, even before that, we saw the exit of Mike Morheim, sort of the longtime president. We saw Jay Allen Brack get caught up in some of the sexual abuse allegations as well, and him leave the company, the president that replaced Mike Morheim. And now we have a totally different leadership. They had nominated two different leaders to run Blizzard, Jen O'Neill and Mike Ybarra, and Jen resigned, and it came out that Jen was paid less than Mike. And so Mike is solo head of the studio now. And there's been a lot of changes at the top of Activision as well, more broadly. And they're in the middle of an acquisition process, which that's a lot of moving parts around an entire dev. And I mean, I'm not expecting like Bobby Kotick to come down from on high and like tell the game designers how to design a game. But some of the monetization stuff that we've talked about throughout this conversation certainly could see that being impacted by sort of the bigger, cloud that is hanging over Blizzard right now. Are you shocked at all or surprised at all by the fact that they're moving into kind of this battle pass type service in a way that they haven't before? Because obviously they have been criticized for monetization before with loot boxes and other things. Is the change in direction in that way surprising to you?
I don't think it's necessarily surprising at all. And I think all the stuff you're talking about, and then also one I didn't mention in the video, was also COVID. I would say it's probably pretty easy to say they probably lost at least 8 months of dev time to COVID, because basically every game that was coming out in that year also got delayed while people were started transitioning to remote. But yeah, I would say when it comes to monetization, it's not necessarily surprising. I would say the reason it's surprising isn't the fact that it happened, but that it didn't happen sooner. Because when it comes to Overwatch, for example, Overwatch as a video game hit a really unique time in the FPS industry. 2016, its biggest competitor was like Battleborn and Paladins. Like, what other game is as a live service or FPS anything with the polish of Overwatch in 2016? I don't know of. I'm trying to remember. I don't remember practically any. And then nowadays you have a lot. There's a lot of different competitors. And so even then, though, if you go in the history of Overwatch, it would have been very possible for them to update and modernize their model to copy their competitors even back then. 2017 would have been the year of PUBG. I want to say that's around early to mid PUBG. And then by the end of 2017, Fortnite launched, but Fortnite was only really in full effect by 2018. A year after that, in early 2019, you had Apex Legends. Any of these points, Blizzard could have turned around and been like, hey guys, next BlizzCon, let's just say we're going free to play and just do everything everyone else is doing because they're making way more money and they have way more players. They could have done that at any point. But instead, that's when they were riding the train into Overwatch 2. And so to me, the monetization was really only a matter of time, because that's just how the industry has moved over the years. And even if it's possible to do so otherwise, the fact that it's like a publicly traded company worth billions of dollars, they're always going to take kind of the cookie cutter standard in my book. They're probably not going to do anything too crazy. That's kind of what I reserve for like indies and indie companies and indie devs, because they have more, I guess, creative control. So
I want to talk about what you think's next for the game. We don't have a hard date on the PvE side of the game at all, to my knowledge. I think they've said broadly 2023, but we don't know. Where do you think the game goes from here? If you were sitting in Aaron Keller's chair, what would you plan to do? Not just from a gameplay perspective, but from like a marketing perspective and other parts of the game to push this, like move the vessel forward, basically.
I mean, they've kind of already outlined it all on their roadmap. They didn't give an explicit date on PvE experiences, but there was one interesting thing I didn't actually include in my video, which was there was a phrasing or wording on one of their marketing outlets that said something like the battle pass price could change by season 3 or later. I could go find and track down the exact bit, but to me that kind of implies like, okay, by the time season 3 or 4 start hitting, and the fact that they want to be open to changing battle pass prices, I can see them just tacking on PvE on top. But when it comes to everything else and the roadmap and what the plan is for Overwatch as a franchise, I feel like their roadmap is pretty much it that they've given it. They say every 9 weeks we're gonna have a new season. Every other season's a new character. We want a new game mode every year, a core one, and then now everyone knows that basically we're entering the same type of seasonal cadence as every other game. So the same way that like Valorant, Apex, and Fortnite release content, that's going to be us now. We want to like that's going to be us. We're going to be doing seasonal drops, and so I can see them doing marketing pushes around every season. They've already talked about how they want to have each season have its own clear identity, both in aesthetically via skin themes as well as basically they want to front load balance changes on a seasonal perspective, so that way each season also has its own gameplay identity to an extent, which many games do. So for example, if I go play Apex Legends, you will usually, after the first 3 weeks of a season or so, most balance will be very, very minor. Like there might be very minor tweaks, but for the most part, it's already set. And that's because they're like, well, this will just be the season of, maybe a sniper rifle's OP. I guess this is just the sniper rifle season. GG, go next. Wait until next season. And then, that way at least each season is different. When people walk in, everything's a little bit different. So.
Do you think that can work though with this type of game where like, you brought up Apex a few times. I play a lot of Apex, and you're right. Like the gun changes and the character changes. They create there. It feels like there's more to balance, which is both like it's both difficult and also easy, or like easier to make changes that are very noticeable, right? Like when a gun goes from being able to be found on the map anywhere to being in a drop, right? Like in a airdrop, right? That is a very distinct thing. When it goes into being, when they change the items with, why am I forgetting the name? The crafting mechanic as well. I haven't played Apex in like 2 weeks. Anyway, but nonetheless, there's a lot of things that you can change in Apex, whether it be weaponry, characters, etc. That's not the case with Overwatch. Overwatch has characters. They have a set play style, set mechanics to them, right? A few abilities, etc. Do you think that without that variance, that can impact their ability to make things different and unique?
So it kind of sounds like what you're describing is the fact that Apex has more shared gameplay among everything because everyone uses the same weapons, and same thing with Valorant. So when you tweak something balance-wise, it impacts the whole game there, but in Overwatch, you're only impacting a single character. And am I on the right track?
Yeah, I would say more broadly, like for those games, when something changes season to season or whatever in that sort of bigger balance patch, it's more noticeable, right? Like it immediately becomes more noticeable because there's more things to balance. There's more things to change because there's more content in terms of every gun is different. They fire differently. They play differently. One can be put in a loot, one cannot, right? Like there's more things to do around that sort of season cadence, live service cadence. Where in Overwatch, you just have your characters, and obviously they're talking about putting out new characters, but the variants of those characters specifically don't necessarily change. Like you could be a Revenant with like probably 20 different loadouts in Apex. You're a Roadhog in Overwatch, right? Like you can change each ability's balance, but functionally the character itself doesn't change more broadly because there's less pieces.
I guess actually I disagree fundamentally because I feel like Overwatch as a video game, its biggest strength is actually the variance. It's actually the absurdity. The gameplay in Overwatch on each character is so fundamentally different from everyone else that is probably its single biggest strength, but also weakness. Like there's no other game where I can walk in and play hamster running around in a ball and then go play a Call of Duty character that just like shoots a gun and sprints. Because those other games have very clear identities. Valorant is a attack shooter. Apex is like Apex a little bit harder, but it's like a high time to kill. Everybody's using tracking weapons for the most part, and Overwatch is, it's Overwatch. It's a little bit crazy. And so you're right that the variance from season to season is a little bit different, I guess, for us hardcore players who maybe we know every character, we've done everything, right? But I also think there's something to be said for the fact that they are trying to fit so many conflicting play styles and so many conflicting things in Overwatch that should normally contradict each other in any rational game. But Overwatch is crazy enough to be like, yeah, we can have the hamster in the ball, and we can also have like that guy who wall rides, and also the guy who shoots only shotguns, and then also the monkey. And not other games really do that. But for a new player, though, right? They get to walk in, they get to see all that, and they're just like, what the hell's going on? And I think that's also why a lot of us caught the core Overwatch magic in many ways, is because you kind of admire and respect the amount of ridiculous characters they have. Also, in just like the lore wise, like the cinematics are so good, but also just when we're talking strictly about like variance and gameplay, the gameplay side of things of you're shifting to a free to play audience season to season for the hardcore player base. It's true that what you're describing of, I think it's basically more difficult to have sweeping changes because of what you said, but also Overwatch has its own specific metas that we all kind of follow. And Overwatch League is notorious for this as well. So for example, I don't watch much Overwatch League, which is weird because I'm a former pro, but basically Junker Queen came out and she was ridiculously popular. And so everyone, essentially the game kind of devolved into, we all must mirror Junker Queen style comps, and there might be variation how we play it. But as far as I know, basically everyone played Junker Queen comps if you wanted to win. And so suddenly, like, sure, tweaking something like Junker Queen may not be varied across everything, but also because metas in Overwatch can quickly devolve into everyone mirrors, it does actually significantly change the game and how it's played season to season.
They've talked about game modes. Obviously, we've seen a few different things. Traditionally, game modes for them mean the way that you play, whether it be payload or something else, right? Like that's their difference. But I think maybe they have an opportunity here, and this at least gets me pretty excited about their game, is that one thing we've seen with Fortnite is like some game modes are really nuts, like in the sort of season by season cadence, and some game modes come in, some game modes go away. League has done an okay job at this, but like again, that high variance, it is not the core gameplay that you would see in OWL or the more serious versions of Overwatch, but you can do something really, really weird. I would like your take. What is the most weird thing you can think of to do with Overwatch if you were a game designer?
Oh, not game designer. I just log in and see what crazy shit people are doing in the workshop. There's this interesting thing, and I learned this from Valve actually a really long time ago, and I was talking to Valve employees in Team Fortress 2, because Valve is a company that is essentially made up of modders at its core from old school games. Like back in the day, the core of Valve were all modders. And so I remember I would talk to, I think it was Robin Walker we were talking to about this in Team Fortress 2, and it was something along the lines of like, it doesn't really matter what I come up with because I'm secretly competing with like 10,000 people who can mod my game. So eventually, just by the, like, it doesn't matter how good I am, one of them is probably going to come up with an idea better than me, right? And so it's like that idea sort of applied to what you said. I don't know what crazy thing I could come up with, but Overwatch as a video game has the tools to create it yourself. And so all I would do is I'd just scroll down the workshop, just be like, what are you doing? What crazy stuff are you guys doing together? And eventually I'd find something crazy. I
feel like that is an opportunity. I hope it's something they lean into. It's something that Halo, for example, has leaned into quite successfully, right? Like there are certain games that people made in Halo Forge back in the day that became game modes within Halo itself, even if they're not like in the official playlist of things that you would play in competitive Halo. But that's fun. I hope Overwatch does that because it does make it fun. To your point, the Valve games have done that pretty well.
I do think like Overwatch has done a really good job building out core systems like that over the years. So, for example, they've come up with replays. They redesigned their matchmaking around role queue, and then they did come out with the workshop. Workshop does have a lot of those really, really interesting and good modes. Like we did. I mean, I haven't gone there in ages because I stopped playing Overwatch for a while. But one of my favorites was still the most basic, and it was there since like day one. It was just mini golf with Torbjorns. It would take parts of the map and set up little goals, and you just fly around the map as a little Torb, and you just try and get in the hole. And it was like super basic, super easy, but it was fun. And there was lots of games like that in the workshop that people make. And I guess what I'm trying to say is Overwatch has created the systems for people to make that themselves, and the community just has to support it by trying it out and coming up with their own crazy stuff. And I think they will. I think they've done a really good job so far on that end.
Yeah, if we see some of those become official game modes, I'll be really happy. If they just start plucking, like, there's a way to do that. Valve has shown the way to do that. You just start plucking, like, and again, they don't have to be there all the time. You just bring one in for a season, let people have fun. It's like the Earth method in League, right? Like, you bring it back, like, twice a year, and it's crazy, and there are a bunch of people that play it, and then it goes away. Then you, like, linger for it. And it's a marketing tool within itself, because if one game mode is popular enough, then people will come back during those periods of time when the game mode is back, right? So we've invited Hawk and Miller to ask an audience question. Hawken, go ahead with your question.
Thanks, Brandon, for taking time to speak to us today. I cover Overwatch occasionally on a freelance basis. And I was curious, I know you mentioned you're not necessarily following the esports side of things as much, but I'm going to ask anyway. How has that switch to 5v5 changed, from a player perspective, how people are, preparing for matches and thinking about comps and such? And does that make it a better spectating experience for esports?
So the first part of that would be, does it change how a player views and experiences the game? I mean, it's a little bit hard because I'm not a current pro, right? And so I can't necessarily talk about it, but I would just immediately say, like, just by the nature of it, adjusting the comps, adjusting the core gameplay, I would talk to a current pro to get the gameplay side of things more than I would. I would imagine it just changes a lot of stuff fundamentally, obviously, but beyond that, because it is still at its core Overwatch, like all of the same ways that they break down a game of Overwatch 1 are the exact same ways they're going to break down and talk about a game of Overwatch 2. Although everything changes with the nature of 5v5 and new characters and everything top to bottom in that end, that I don't think changes too much. Just the process of a team trying to figure out a game, figure out why a team composition works or why a strategy works. They would just take their systems that they made in Overwatch 1, apply it to Overwatch 2 and 5v5 and just roll with it. As for the spectatability of the esport, that's a hard one because there's two parts of it to me. The first part is there's objectively less on the screen, so therefore it is easier to watch. But then there's also the other part of it, which is, does it actually matter that it's easier to watch, even just a little bit, going from 6v6 to 5v5? And I don't think so. And the reason I say I don't think so is because Overwatch at its core is such an unwatchable game from a spectator experience, because so many of the skill-based moments are not telegraphed properly to the viewer. That doesn't change going from 6v6 to 5v5, because that is a fundamental process of the pacing of the game built in. For example, like, how can a commentator set up a team fight that's about to happen when a new team fight happens every 15 seconds? It's just not really possible. Like, at least in League or in Valorant or CS, there's always downtime. There's always significant amounts of downtime. Overwatch doesn't have downtime. It doesn't matter by going from 6s to 5s, doing a bunch of balance and fundamental changes. The spectator problems and the setup at its core, I don't think significantly changes enough. Although it's still nice. Like, it's still an improvement. I don't think it like shifts the needle super significantly in either case.
Is there a way to fix that, you think, as my follow-up? I'm just thinking because, like, I think of like the tac shooters, Counter-Strike in particular, and the fighting games that are really successful as esports. Those things get a lot of inbound traffic around their major events, be it the majors in Counter-Strike or EVO or some of the other big fighting game events. A lot of people come to watch them that aren't regular players because at their core, they're very digestible, right? Like they are very easy to understand, very difficult to execute. It's like the way I always describe those games. I punch person, they lose health. I shoot person, they die. And I plant a bomb. Like, it's a very basic concept at its core. But for the highest level players, they do it in a certain way that is, incredibly skilled, right? So it makes it really tough. Do you think there's a way to make Overwatch more digestible in that way? Or do you think we're just lost based off the way that the game is created and made?
It's very difficult, I think, to do so, because how a lot of it would work is anything that you would try to move the needle on that aspect just alienates a large portion of your existing original audience, not just viewer audience, but also gameplay audience, because that's really what the question is about, right? How do we shift the game to make it more of an esport? And I think that's just at its core a very, very difficult one, because at that point you're asking like a random pro player game design questions, which never goes well because we're not game designers. It's the core idea of like, the pro player can critique really well, but don't ask him to give solutions because he's just dumb. And so I do think that it's never doomed. There's always going to be better improvements or better ways. There's always ways to improve any situation you're in. But on a fundamental level, I think they're in a difficult one, right? The idea that, yeah, you're going to be in for a tough time just because of the fast-paced nature of your game. No matter what, it's probably going to be a bit harder to watch than an attack shooter like Valorant that's round-to-round downtime. It has, even then, like the executes in Valorant, like it's pretty telegraphed. You can see them running to the site. You see them setting up. It's already getting communicated to the viewer. Compare that to an Overwatch team fight where it can sometimes just be immediately over because someone saw an opening, immediately dropped an ult, and there's no telegraph, nothing, unless you're a super experienced player or spectator. So
We have another question from Pack Gamer. I'm just going to read this one. Sorry, Pack Gamer. All right, so the question is, and this is a little bit different take on what I was asking earlier about the general community broadly. At this point, we've seen multiple accounts about how poorly the initial Overwatch League / Twitch deal went and declining viewership. Do you think that there's any chance that the Overwatch League will improve under Overwatch 2?
Yes. So when it comes to Overwatch League and being successful or not, there's a couple different parts of it, I think. Because the first part is they feel a little bit less corporate over time. Their content strategy as a league has actually become much more fluid. And the people behind the scenes who are making content and actually running the production of the league are very, very skilled at what they do. And it feels like they aren't necessarily as uptight and corporate as they used to be back in season 1, which was very kind of buttoned up, extremely serious. We don't want to potentially, upset an investor or something. And so therefore, when you have a game that is potentially getting more traffic, the league is based on the game and it's very, very tied to the game's audience. So the game going free to play, actually getting content again, and the game is on, like, if the game's trajectory is going up, the league can improve big time. And just because the game has flaws in how it's spectated doesn't mean that the game and the league has ever hit its like theoretical ceiling, or that it would ever, I can't find the words for it, but basically what I'm trying to say is the league and the game can only really improve. And if the game is moving upward, then the league and the viewership and the statistics also probably could as well. It's also a difficult thing to talk about because in many ways, the expectations of Overwatch were so inflated in the early days. And so it's really, they're not just talking about, in many ways, it reminds me of my own talk about Overwatch 2, where I'm talking about the launch of Overwatch 2, and I'm like, well, the 3 years maybe wasn't that great. And then Overwatch League, a lot of the successes, yeah, you're doing okay, but is it worth the 20 mil? It's like, no, but it gets compared to that now. So they're kind of in on it. So I don't know. It's a hard one.
Yeah, the biggest problem with the Overwatch League has always been the expectations that were set by the buy-in prices, which haven't been paid in some time, as I've reported. Like they've kind of been on hold since COVID. But nonetheless, you're right. There's the shadow lingers over it in terms of kind of what the expectations from the corporate business side of the equation was versus what the actual game was and game dev and interest in the game is. So those two things, there's a big C there between the two of them. So
yeah,
I think you're totally right. All right, so the last question is going to be from Cactus Puppy. Do you think that the dev team will ever break their pseudo-fundamental rule on only ever having one central object active at any time for core game modes?
Ooh, I actually like that question because Overwatch at its core was built upon this foundation of Team Fortress 2 stuff. And so Team Fortress 2, in many ways, it's interesting when we look at how Overwatch has evolved as a video game and its meta and gameplay compared to Team Fortress 2 over time. So Team Fortress 2 is a very spread out game. Like, people are a lot more self-sufficient, and so people spread out naturally around the map a lot more than in Overwatch. And Overwatch is very heal-centric. Like, if you aren't getting actively healed the next 10 seconds, you're probably going to fall over soon, type of thing. And so it gets difficult to then have spread out objectives when the game is practically built around always having one central team combined with some like a few off angle players. And so I actually would like it. I really hope they do actually. They've teased new game modes in the future. And so I'd be down. I hope they do. I think they would. It's difficult when we talk about core game modes because Overwatch has a very distinct thing in between core and non-core. So for example, what Jacob was talking about earlier with like cool arcade modes or like cool workshop modes and bring them to the normal game, they put all those in arcade. But when it comes to a core game mode, they expect that to be in ranked and everything. Like that will probably also be an Overwatch League, right? That would be in everything. And so at what point then they have to be a little more precise and careful about how they put stuff in. But I hope they do. I really hope they do.
Yeah, I'd love to see a game mode where actually they just like juice the number of players and they go from the standard 5, like be it, I don't know, 10, 12, something, when then they like split each team across those multiple objectives. Not exactly BR style gameplay, but if you can kind of visualize what I'm meaning, where it's like bigger teams and similar in terms of almost like raid gameplay in a type of way. I think that there's a lot of potential for that. Granted, it'd be really difficult to build it up.
It's difficult to get increased player size for Overwatch because they've actually budgeted performance so tightly on old gen consoles. They used to, one of the engineers once told a story interview once about how when they added Echo to the game, she could copy a character, and therefore it was possible that they could copy a character and the original person swaps, and you could have 13 in a game instead of 12 in the original game. And so that broke the game. Like they were budgeted so tightly on memory constraints for the old generation consoles that they would just crash. And so they had to add in a restriction because they liked the idea that that player could not swap characters. And so anyway, I forget the exact question of how we got there, but basically it'd be tough for them to mess with. But also in many ways, that old school FPS experience you described is how I grew up, right? The idea of, it's a community server of like 12v12 or 16v16. And there's an element, I think, in modern games that gets lost sometimes in that conversation where it's a little more chill because it's not 5v5 and serious where your decisions necessarily matter. You can kind of just do whatever you want. And so there's suddenly the game doesn't feel as serious. You could be watching TV while also playing the game and you're having a good time and no one really cares. No one's yelling at you. It's like, yeah, you're having fun. So I hope they do, but I don't know if it's possible.
Well, that's going to be it for us. Thank you so much, Seagull. Appreciate you doing this. Best of luck with everything content creation wise. Hope to see more Overwatch content from you now with Overwatch 2 out. I do miss it. So yeah, thank you for hopping on though and chatting with us.
Thanks for having me. I hope Overwatch does really well too.
Yes, indeed.
It deserves it. This franchise has suffered enough.
Thank you all for tuning into this, and we will be back next week on Monday. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks for watching Visionaries on YouTube. For more content, please subscribe to the Overcome channel.